The worst things that can happen are to go out and spend hours upon hours, day after day, finally get an opportunity, and the equipment fails. Hey guys, Ryan Gill here, and we have 5 common mistakes within primitive archery and hunting that a lot of people are making. And after this short intro, we are going to jump right into it. Every single year I get a tremendous amount of messages and phone calls and emails and any other method of correspondence you could think of about people asking what went wrong. They went out into the woods, they went deer hunting, and it didn't go the way they wanted to. It's been everything from bouncing arrows off deer to only getting a couple inches of penetration to I shot through the deer but we never recovered it. Any number of things can happen, and the worst things that can happen are to go out and spend hours upon hours, day after day, finally get an opportunity, and the equipment fails. So we're going to go ahead and get into those 5 mistakes that you may be making, if not all of them, at least one of them. And all it takes is one of these mistakes, and it can cost you a great deer hunting experience. And I also came up with a 6th, a bonus mistake that I just thought of in the hunting context. So make sure you hang around to the end for that one, because it's a really big one as well. Mistake number 1 is shooting an underpowered bow. This could be done intentionally, knowing that the bow is underpowered, yet shooting it anyway, or it could be that you're simply underdrawing your bow that is meant for a longer draw. And I see this all the time. A lot of times when people are getting sized up for a bow, they go to measure their draw length and they pull the bow back and hold it as far as they can, and then have somebody mark it with a Sharpie, and then they measure the arrow and say, that's my draw length. And then as soon as they go to shoot, they shoot a totally different style and technique than just holding back as far as they possibly can. That's not your true draw length. Your true draw length should be measured while shooting the bow. So your shooting form and style is a different story for a different day. But take an arrow that has 1-inch increments, say starting at 20 inches from the inside of the nock, the 21, 22, all the way up to 30 if you want, and either use different colored Sharpie rings so you can identify them more easily. But don't try to watch the arrow while you shoot, and don't try to overdraw the bow. Shoot comfortably and naturally, and shoot several shots while somebody watches you, and then they can watch where the arrow comes to the back of the bow, and which is the side of the bow that faces away from you when you shoot, and you should be fairly consistent within an inch. If you're not, then you really need to work on your consistency. You should be really consistent within a 1/2 inch, potentially even less. But again, that's kind of different story for a different day. What we're really looking for now is understanding that your true draw length is going to be taken while you're shooting. So you don't pay attention to it. You just shoot at the target like you're trying to kill a deer, and have somebody else watch, and then they'll tell you you're drawing to here. And if you decide to try to lengthen that later, that's totally up to you. But whatever draw length that you consistently shoot when you're target shooting and hunting, especially in the hunting scenario, your body is probably going to resort right back to what it's most comfortable doing. So knowing your true draw length is really important, because if you have a bow that's, say, 50 pounds at 28 inches, and you're like, okay, well, 50 pounds, that should be enough, especially at a 28-inch draw and a modern bowstring that shoots faster and whatnot. you'll say, okay, I can do that. Well, next thing you know, you didn't realize you're actually only maybe drawing 23 or 24 inches, and now you're really below the weight thresholds needed to efficiently kill that animal or to penetrate into that animal. And you're like, the bow is heavy enough, it should be fine, but it's not, because you're not drawing it far enough to hit that weight. So if it's, say, 50 pounds at 28 inches and you're drawing 24 inches, you could be down to 38 pounds or 40 pounds on that bow. And especially if you're hunting with stone points, that's not enough. Typically, I want to tell people, and they say, well, what's the best weight? Well, the weight's one thing, feet per second is another. So the kinetic energy and momentum calculators, you can look that stuff up online. I highly recommend a bow, say at your draw length, somewhere between 55 and 60 pounds. That's me personally. Can you get away with less? Absolutely, especially with stuff like more modern bowstrings. In fact, great case in point is if you don't have this book, you're really hurting your opportunities in primitive archery, because this discusses things at huge detail, and you don't have to just read the whole book. You can go from chapter to chapter and learn about the effects of all of these things that we'll be talking about today. But right at the very beginning, I have a page that's called the answers page, and if you would like to pause this, I'll try to get my fingers out of the way. If you would like to pause this and try to zoom in and read that, you can do that. And this will give you specific numbers and dimensions of what you should be looking for in your primitive archery set. So again, Secrets and Science of Primitive Archery at HuntPrimitive.com. I highly recommend that book to advance your success this season. But I recommend shooting about 150 feet per second, kind of as a minimum, with a 500 grain arrow if you're shooting stone points. So there's some different ways to get there between different draw lengths and different string materials and all that. The closer you get to 160 or over 160 feet per second, the better. Okay, so but 150 is kind of that minimum where, yes, you can absolutely kill deer with slower bows, but you end up running into other problems like the speed of the arrow in general just being so slow. You can have too heavy of an arrow that it's too slow that the deer are just gone by the time the arrow gets there. So that happy medium of speed and power, kinetic energy and momentum is really important, and that's highly detailed in that book. So again, I really recommend that. But making sure that your bow shoots, say, if you use that 500 grain arrow average, that's a good average weight to go off. It doesn't have to be exact. It could be 492 or 505, or it doesn't matter exactly. But shoot that at about 150 feet per second consistently, and then I would say I feel pretty good that you're good to go out and hunt with that weight. If you can get it up higher, shoot 160s, even in a 170s with a primitive wood bow, that's great. I shoot right about 158 to 160 feet per second, even with my shorter draw length, which is about 24 inches, 23 and a half, 24 inches, and I shoot a genuine sinew bowstring. Okay, but I custom built that bow to fit me and be about 60 pounds, and I've killed a lot of different animals with it, lots of deer, lots of hog, and even bison. One more quick note on underpowered bows is utilizing woods that soak up moisture, stuff like whitewood bows. Even if you put modern sealers on them, if you are really exposing your bow to a lot of humid conditions, you're going to lose a lot, and I mean a lot, of performance. So keeping your bow inside and as moisture free as possible is really important. But you're going to notice when you use whitewoods especially, that when you take it out in the woods and you're hunting for a few days, by the end of the few days, if it's in a humid climate like in the east especially, you will notice significant decreases in energy, and you can lose up to 15 to 20, maybe even 25 feet per second between having a dry bow and a moist bow that has just soaked up humidity. And it doesn't happen like that, but it does happen very quickly. So again, even stuff like trying to fire harden, that really dries the wood out well, but those will soak up moisture as well. So we've done a tremendous amount of that testing. That process does help with at least getting rid of some of the moisture a little faster, but it doesn't necessarily stop it from soaking it in. So Osage really doesn't soak up nearly the amount of moisture that whitewoods do, so you can get away with a little bit more abuse on Osage, which is one of the reasons I love hunting with Osage bows, especially here in the humid east. Whitewood bows, you're going to lose a tremendous amount of performance and speed when it's exposed to humid climates and environments, and that you could be really happy with making a bow that's super dry wood, especially if it's fire hardened. You're going to go out, shoot it through a chronograph, you're like, man, I'm shooting 160 feet per second, this is amazing, and then you're never going to shoot it again, and just over a period of time it's just slowly collecting moisture and you don't even notice it because it's so gradual, and next thing you know that bow's shooting 140 feet per second, but in your head you're still thinking, I know this bow shoots 160, and you go out and you shoot a deer and it doesn't penetrate very far. Maybe you lose it, maybe you kill it, maybe the deer completely is gone before the arrow ever gets there, and you're like, man, this stinks, whatever, and you're blaming everything else. Go shoot your bow through a chronograph again and make sure that it is still shooting very quick, because with whitewood bows, it's going to lose a lot of performance as it soaks moisture up. And we talk about that a lot in the book, and also how to mitigate that and how early peoples mitigated that. So really important information to know there, and that is very important to the first mistake of shooting an underpowered bow. All right, mistake number 2 that I see all the time, and it doesn't seem to matter how much I preach this, it goes ignored time and time and time again, and then they have a bad experience, and then they wonder why, and they thought, well, I thought it would work anyway, and that is using too large of a point or too rounded of the front of the point. So stone points take more energy to penetrate simply because they have more friction. They're not ground slick steel. They do have more friction, and that's very well highlighted in the Secrets and Silence of Primitive Archery. We did many tests on that as well, but you significantly increase that friction by having too large of a point or too rounded of a nose on the front. So your arrowheads should have very sharp distal ends. The edges should be very sharp, and they should not be too big. The ideal size ranges that we're looking at, again, are on that answers page, so you can look that up. But basically, about as heavy as you really want to go is probably 80, maybe 90 grains. Typically, the weights that I look for that are my personal favorites are about 50 to 60, maybe up to 70 grains. And I already know people that are used to traditional archery are like, absolutely not. I need a 300 grain stone point onto the end of that arrow, and that's how we're going to penetrate, because kinetic energy and momentum kills, right? Not correct with primitive archery, because stone is significantly lighter than steel, and because steel also has significantly less friction, you can get away with a 200 or 300 grain steel point that has very little friction, and it's not as big as a stone point that would be half the weight. So if you take something like a 150 grain stone point, that's a big stone point, and it has a lot of friction. And what we have found time and time and time again through hunting a lot of animals, I've now killed over 60 big game animals with primitive hunting implements, and I've shot a lot more too that we've not recovered by using inefficient gear, and this is how we've ironed all of this out. But that is the benefits that you would see in the increased kinetic energy and momentum. So the benefits you would get from that, say like in the Dr. Ashby reports, okay, that is completely negated by the increased friction of the larger stone points. So if you try to just make that stone point bigger and heavier, you are going to penetrate less and less and less, because the negative effects, the adverse effects of friction are greater than the benefits that you're going to get from kinetic energy and momentum. Trust me, I've done it time and time again. Shoot a small, very sharp distal end stone point and you will shoot through stuff very consistently, and we have killed a lot of animals. Look into the book, look into the Secrets in Science book. We've got data sheets on going and shooting 20 plus hogs with little tiny points down to like 12 grains, shooting them running 30 yards and dying. Okay, it works really, really well. Don't over-engineer, oversize, or round the front of your stone points, and you will see much better penetration results. Mistake number 3, and this one leads off of the last one. It still has to kind of do with the stone points, but this has to do with the connection between your stone point and your arrow, and that is what I call the transition, or the haft. So we use the word haft and transition. The haft is kind of really how it's hafted and connected. The transition is the transition from the stone point into the arrow shaft itself. And even people that have really nicely made, sharp, properly sized stone points can utterly fail by having a poor transition. And I have preached this for years, and it is amazing how many times I show people what they should have for maximum penetration, and then they completely ignore this step, and then they wonder why it penetrated just to the tip, right to the transition, and then the arrow stopped penetrating altogether, and the deer ran off and the arrow fell out. And they're like, what? I must have hit a bone. You probably didn't hit a bone. Your transition was so abrupt that it stopped penetration. I'm sure we'll throw some photos or video up on the screen as well showing those differences in the haft. In fact, I've got a great illustration in the book, so we'll make sure that we show that to you as well. But then I even have these little transition training tools on the website, so this way they're cast out of plastic, and this is the tip of one of my personal hunting arrows that I cast. And what you'll see is that it's got a very, see how slick and smooth this transition is? And what this is a piece that if you get this, a lot of people were buying arrows from me. So they were buying like a single arrow just so they could model it. Well, by the time they paid for the full arrow and the stone point and the hafting job and all that, it was fairly expensive, which was fine. I just made these to try to help people out so they didn't have to buy a whole arrow. If you want to buy the whole arrow to model the arrow, that's perfectly fine. And then you have the arrow whether you want to shoot it or keep it or whatever. But if you're just wanting to make your own stuff, I made these so you could really look at and feel how smooth the transition is. Because I always say if you can squeeze your fingers together actually pretty tightly and then put the tip in between, if you can push and it slides through like that, you can squeeze it pretty darn hard. And you can just push and it slides through, it's going to slide through on an animal as well. If you have a really bad transition and you do this, you're going to go whoop and it's going to push your hand. Try it out. I'm telling you, bad transitions are horrible for penetration. They can outright stop your arrow. So yes, they can decrease it, and you might still get in there far enough to kill it, but I've seen a lot of people penetrate into an animal that far, actually kill it, and then when they pull it out and they show their kill, it has this much blood on the end of the arrow, and they were lucky that they killed it. You want to be able to shoot through all the organs of that animal, and a good transition is crucial for that. And every time I tell people this, I am so amazed that they watch all of my content, they have the book, they've even had personal hands-on training from me, and then I look at their transitions and they're god awful. Do the work and trim it down, taper the arrow into it. All of this information is in the Secrets and Science of Primitive Archery. It's there for you. And like I said, I share the answers page and all of this stuff for free because I want you to use this information and be as successful as possible. Mistake number 4. All right, we're rounding it in. This is one that I see fairly common, not super common, but common enough that we need to really bring it up, and that is shooting inconsistent arrows. Now, I've had some people say they don't want to build their own bow because they're intimidated by that process, and that's perfectly fine. But then they're like, I could build arrows. And the truth is, building a matched set of arrows, not building one arrow, building a matched set of arrows is actually more difficult than building a bow. And the reason is this: if you build a bow and it survives and it shoots well, it's pretty much going to do the same thing, aside from maybe soaking up moisture, as we talked about in mistake number 1. But the bow's going to do the same thing, and you only had to build one of those. Now, anybody can go cut a stick, make something that looks like an arrow, and maybe it goes out and it flies like an arrow, right? So you go shoot it, maybe it's got a little kick in it when it flies, or it wobbles a little bit, but it's good enough and it goes. And then they're like, cool, I got this, I'm gonna go make arrows. They go into the woods, they cut like 5 sticks, they come back, they make 5 more arrows, and then they're like, cool, I got my arrows. And now they're outside shooting, and arrows are going all over the place, and now they're freaking out. Is it the bow? Is the bow messing up on me? Am I just not shooting accurately? What has typically happened, at least from this sense, is I will have made a custom bow for somebody, right? Then they'll go shoot and they say, this bow is horribly inaccurate, I can't hit anything. And then I'm like, what arrows are you shooting? And they're like, I went out and I made my own arrows. And I'm like, how many, like, have you made arrows before, and a lot of them? And they're like, no, I just made my own arrows. Boom, that's the problem. And I'm like, you need to get some consistent arrows and then shoot it, and you'll realize that the bow is doing the same thing every time. And so the bow's the least likely thing to be messing up. It's either A, the shooter, or B, the arrows. And more times than not, if you're making your own arrows and you're new to arrow making, it's actually the arrows you made, it's not the bow, and it's probably not even you. And that's why I always recommend that people at least get a few really consistent arrows so they know what to model their arrows after. Because if you go out and you shoot and you know that these arrows are doing really well and you're doing well, and then you build your own arrows and they're not flying so good, now you know where the problem is and how to start fixing that. So building consistent arrows that all fly the same is tougher than you think, especially because you can weigh them almost all the same, you can spine them almost all the same, and still end up with some inconsistencies with your arrows. So there's some things that are important and there's other things that aren't important. And actually you can specifically build the bow, which I talk about in other videos and in my book. You can build the bow to where the string tracks closer to the side of the bow that the arrow is going to be on, and that's going to require less oscillation of the arrow to bend around the handle of the bow, less bending, and that's going to decrease how finicky the arrows are going to be on your bow. So if you have a bow that's really finicky and it's more the string lines down the center, your arrow spine is going to have to be dialed in better, so when you shoot, it kind of bends the arrow around the bow, so when it clears, and then people call it the archer's paradox, and it's not really a paradox, but it's oscillation of the arrow. If you see one in slow motion, how it wobbles until it starts to straighten out. So it's like flexing back and forth like this. So build the bow correctly and you can actually shoot pretty much any spine of arrow. In fact, my personal arrows, I don't even spine test. I actually shoot typically ones that are way over spined, like 70 to 100 pound spine ranges, because customers don't really want those, and I know that they're going to shoot great out of my bow because I built my bow specifically to shoot any arrow that I put down it. And so I don't mind shooting these really heavy spined arrows, and they fly perfectly straight every single time. But I also know how to make the arrows really consistently, which we teach you in some of the arrow building videos that we have and also in the books. But building arrows is tougher than most people think. So make sure that you are shooting consistent arrows. And with that in mind, when you're hunting, if your arrows are flying with like yaw, so if you're shooting, those arrows should go straight into the target, but if they fly like this to the target and then hit and straighten out, or they just hit at different angles, or they're really wobbling or porpoising in flight when they hit, when that arrow is focused directly on the target and it's flying straight, it's maximizing all the energy right at the tip of that arrow, and the weight of that arrow and the momentum is driving straight forward to penetrate that. If it's flying at an angle, like my arm would be the shaft, and it's flying at an angle, when it hits, that tail end is wanting to wrap around, and you're losing all the energy that was carrying in the back of the arrow going straight forward. It's now wanting to kick off to the side, and so it's going to rob energy from the tip of your arrow needed for penetration, and it's going to basically disperse it out through the shaft. And it may not hit the animal and just go sideways. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you're losing that energy potential to penetrate straight. So having an arrow that flies crooked or wobbly will rob performance. You'll also notice that when you look at a lot of penetration tests that we've done, when you shoot a target really close, which you think would have the most penetration because it would have the most energy, it actually doesn't have the best penetration. The best penetration is back when you start getting 15 or 20 yards, and the reason is the oscillation of that arrow has pretty much gone away. So now that arrow is flying really straight and it's focusing all the energy onto the target. When you shoot something really close and that arrow's got a lot of dynamic flex, a lot of oscillation, it's robbing the energy from the direct focal point of hitting on the target and getting penetration. So interesting information, all again researched in the book. But consistent arrows and ones that fly very, very straight are what you're looking for. All right, mistake number 5, and this one is shooting too much. Stop shooting so much. I know it's fun to shoot. It is so much fun to shoot. I get it. And you can get just that addiction, that dopamine addiction of shooting an arrow and it hits and you're like, cool, I'm going to go get it and I'm going to shoot it again. But how many times, and I know so many people that can relate to this, and I would say almost everybody. If you are not one of these people, good for you, but I almost guarantee that everybody watching this has shot for an extended period of time and enjoyed themselves and has shot pretty good, and the more they shoot, the worse they get. They get archer's fatigue, they get mental fatigue, and now all of a sudden they're not shooting very good. And you start like making deals in your head, being like, I just shot horrible and I don't want to end on that. And it's like, okay, if I can just put these next 3 right there together, I'm done. And then you shoot 2 and they did good, and then the third one you miss, and it's like you can't stand it, and you just keep doing it. It's like you're gambling. You don't know when to quit, and you just get worse. You never end on those sessions going, whew, I nailed it, I put everyone in there. It's usually you go in and you're mad at yourself, and what you've done is you've also not only undermined your confidence, but you've now worked on developing bad muscle habits through over practicing while having fatigue. So when you're just starting out, of course, you have to shoot a lot to really build the muscles and build your technique and all of that stuff. But once you've kind of got the process down, I recommend only shooting a couple arrows a day, tops. So like when I practice, now this sounds horrible, I bet, to a lot of people. I don't practice ever. Pretty much never. But I've been shooting my entire life. So everybody's like, man, you must shoot a lot. You probably shoot every day. I never shoot because I hunt all the time and I have a tremendous amount of confidence both in myself and my gear. So the last time, I always get a kind of a joke about this when somebody asks about that. They'll say, when's the last time you shot your bow? Thinking it would have been like, yesterday or an hour ago. And I'm like, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago when I shot that hog or something like that. And they're like, seriously? Yeah. And I'd be like, well, the next time that I shoot is probably going to be when I kill the next hog or deer. And that's how I work. That's just how I process through. Now, I do shoot when I'm testing my arrows. So if I make replacement arrows or have to fix stuff that I've shot animals with, then I go out and I take a test shot or two, and if they fly good first shot, boom, I already know they're done. I don't want to continue to shoot them, because as soon as you start getting fatigue and you start getting flyers, that's when you start questioning, is the arrow off? Am I off? Is something wrong with the bow? It raises all of those questions. So once you have a lot of confidence in your shooting, stop overshooting. And the most damaging time to shoot too much, and I see it in a lot of people, and I know because I was one of these people, is you shooting great all summer because you're going out, shooting a couple arrows today, maybe you take a week off, you go out and you shoot, a couple dozen shots, you're having a good time, but you're shooting good, you're feeling good. Then archery season's coming, right? Deer season's 2 weeks away, and we're like, oh, I'm excited. And then you're like, I'm gonna go out and practice. And now you're practicing every day, and you're shooting dozens of arrows, and your shooting is getting worse, and now you're freaking out, and you're like, I'm gonna quit. I can't do any of this. I can't even shoot. And now you're in the woods, you're in a tree stand, or you're in a blind, and your confidence is trashed because you just have not been shooting well. And you're like, man, this sucks. It's like I've been shooting so good all summer, and now I can't hit anything. And so now you're not thinking about how good of a shot you are, and you are. You're worried that you're going to make a bad shot. And if a deer walks by and you're worried you're going to make a bad shot, you're going to make a bad shot. That's how it works. So it's like that's like if you're looking at a deer and you're just waiting for it to turn and it's standing there forever and you're up and you're ready. I hate that, because that's when doubt starts to creep in your mind and you start getting in your own head and you can mess it up. That's why most people will say if a deer like runs in fast and it stops and you shoot it, you make a perfect shot, runs over and it dies. You didn't have time to think about it, right? So there was no mental fatigue that was compounding in that situation. Well, that confidence of just knowing what to do means a lot in the woods. And so if you've destroyed your confidence by shooting too much and getting too much fatigue and building bad habits, you're going to go into the woods and make really bad shots. That's just the way it works. So stop shooting so much. Shoot 3 shots a day is one of the things that I love to tell people. If you're not to a position where you can be like me and basically not shoot unless you're shooting at rabbits or testing arrows or shooting at deer. Like I get a lot of shooting in, obviously. I get probably more shooting in just in hunting scenarios than most people do. So when we're shooting fish, obviously then I'm getting a lot of shots. I'm getting a lot of reps in. Same thing with, hunting small game. There's a lot of rabbits down here in Florida, so we usually get a couple shots, throughout the week at rabbits and, again, deers and hogs and stuff like that. So, but if that's not going to be feasible for you, then I recommend, instead of going out and shooting a whole bunch, once you know you have a good consistent set of arrows, remember mistake number 4 on the whiteboard over here. Once you have a good consistent group of arrows, don't even get a group of arrows. Take one arrow, use one arrow to practice, go out and take one cold shot. And you want that one cold shot to be exactly where you want it to be. And if you can do that, then you should have the confidence. Then, if it's not, maybe take 2 more shots. Build that confidence, then go in and stop shooting. Come back out in 2 hours and shoot one cold shot. But you should not be sitting there shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting, especially right before hunting season. If you just want to shoot a whole bunch, do it over the summer or do it in the spring when you don't have to, perform on a high stress level in the hunting situation, and you want your mind to be clear. You want to enjoy shooting, that's fine. Don't do it right before season. Don't shoot too much during season. Once your confidence in your shooting, stop shooting too much. Okay, now the bonus one. The bonus one is rushing your shots in the hunting scenario. And this is very, very common. I see it a lot. And that is, consider it target panic in some situations. Other situations are just a lack of self-control, or you're worried that the animal's going to get away. Okay? I've seen this so many times, and it very rarely works out. Occasionally you get lucky. But what I've seen a lot is you'll have an animal that's coming in, and it's like coming in kind of to you. It's quartering to you, right? And you've got a perfect shot on the shoulder, but you have to shoot at the shoulder. And all of a sudden something's looking like, okay, I'm going to get out of here, or it stops and it looks at you, right? You're like, uh-oh, I'm busted. And then you go to wing an arrow. Very low percentage shot, especially with primitive gear and stone points, that you're going to be able to get it through that shoulder and into the vitals. Now, there are times that you can miss those bones. I've shot hogs really far forward or got some lucky hits or whatever and gotten through. But generally speaking, when you rush those shots and take bad shot angles, it doesn't work out very good. Same thing with, we love a quartering away shot, so the animal's kind of quartering away, but when they're really heavily quartering away, almost every single time you're going to shoot that thing right in the butt. Almost every time, because you're going to be worried that if you shoot this far, you're just going to like skin up its shoulder and miss. And so you're trying to thread the needle on this hard quartering away shot between basically just skinning underneath the skin or underneath the shoulder. See, like you could shoot behind the shoulder and it actually go under the armpit and the arrow be sticking in it running away, but it never even got into the rib cage because it just went underneath the shoulder meat. So I've seen that, or they end up hitting it right in the butt, because if you're a little bit to one side or the other, your shot's off. Trying to get that perfect right behind the last rib and then angle up through is a lot more difficult than you think, especially when you shoot. Animals do tend to react to the sound of the shot. So because I film a lot of my hunts, you can go back and you can slow down, and animals that had no idea I was there, even 10 yards away, even hogs, which are significantly slower reaction times than deer, you will notice that I will shoot and hogs will already be whirling, even ducking. I've seen hogs duck, not quite as hard as deer, but when they go to run, it's like they pick their legs up to run and their body, just drops. And that's why a lot of shots you'll see end up being high, because animals are dropping, reacting to the shots, and then they get high. Even it ranges as close as 10 yards, which is again one of the reasons not to shoot, as in mistake 1, an underpowered bow or a very slow bow, because the slower the arrow is traveling to get there, the more time that animal has to drop, whirl, or get out of the way. And so that's why also taking very long range shots, I've seen this as well. Deer comes in, it's 20, 25, 30 yards out there, and you're like, I can shoot at a 3D target and I can dump arrows every day, all day long. I can just shoot 30 yards into this deer target and make killing shots. So you're like, I know I can shoot. I'm a form archer. I do all this. I see this with compound hunters wanting to shoot 30, 40, 50 yards all the time. The targets don't move. Live animals move and they react to the shot, and that distance is all the more distance that they have to react to the shot. So when people tend to take those long shots, you'll notice that the deer are already moving a considerable amount before the arrow ever gets there. And all of these things stack up to bad shots. So shooting too far, or shooting at bad angles, or being in a tree stand and shooting severely down, really close to your stand, giving you see a lot of the back and those tight ribs and the facets of the vertebrae, very hard to penetrate through, especially with stone equipment. You got to really kind of slide that in, just kind of lucky in between ribs. I mean, you'll break ribs on the side very easily, but where they attach to the spine, they're a lot tougher. They don't have the flex, and that can really rob your penetration. So all of these different angles, they're just not ideal for hunting situations or those extended distances. So what you're really going to be looking for is, I've kind of extended my range out a little bit closer to 20 yards at this point, but my stuff's shooting pretty darn quick. I shoot some lighter arrows intentionally, so I have a lot faster. I shoot typically now 400-ish grain arrows. I don't mind shooting high 300 grain arrows or 420 grain arrows. And everybody's like, that's way too light. And it's like, nope, we've proved over and over in the book it's not. If your transitions and your points are optimized and your bow shoots plenty hard, you'll shoot that stuff through hogs and deer all day long. But the arrow is going to get there faster. And so I've been able to extend my range where the arrows get there without the deer reacting too severely. But you'll also notice on those shots that I shoot deer at 18 or 20 yards, you'll notice that they are moving. And what happens is what would normally be a perfect double lung hit ends up being a liver and a one lung hit because the deer is starting to move. And so that's why I typically keep my shots fairly close, 15 yards in, and you should probably be looking at that 10 to 15 yard range, 15 yards max, until you really develop that confidence, know how your bow's shooting and all of that, and only be shooting at perfectly broadside animals. And I know it's really tough to have to wait, and sometimes you just don't get the shot. But if it was easy, everybody would be doing it, and they're not. That's what makes primitive hunting very challenging, yet very rewarding. So that's why modern hunters that hunt with compound bows and crossbows, they have a lot of power. They can take that quartering two shot. They can take some really hard shot angles that traditional archers can't, and especially primitive archers can't. So you need to wait for those perfect shots, and that's your bonus mistake. And hopefully all of these things that we've talked about in this video will come full circle around and help you be the best hunter that you can be this season. So I recommend sending this video to somebody else that's on their own primitive hunting journey, and hopefully it'll help them out. And when you share stuff and you watch it, you guys talk about it, and it's going to seat that information to both of you. So watching something, you can learn a lot from it. Talking about it with somebody else really seats it in, and then go act on it. Okay, so good luck hunting this season, and we'll hopefully catch you on many adventures to come.